Welcome to the course Using Data to Provide Personalized Student Support. In this second week, our study is going to focus on the area of data analysis. What do we mean by data analysis? Remember that we were working with a set of logs that were living in a database. Those logs were processed from a file, and some sort of meaningful information has been created in the initial stages. What we're going to explore is how this information can be processed by what we call a statistical package and obtain from there what we call models. And these models have the capacity to predict certain results. So in this context, these are the questions we want you to start thinking about for this week. The first one is the type of processes that you envision that are required to analyze data. This analysis of data is not trivial. It's fairly complex and it requires a process, and this process has various steps. Now remember, some of them we covered last week. We want you to start identify which ones are relevant for this week. The second question is start thinking about the type of insights that are possible to obtain. What we mean by insights, remember last week we talked about things like motivation, perhaps estimations of how students engage, so we would put here engagement as well, or any other aspects that you can think of. And the final question we want you to ponder this week is, again, it's about connections. How do we connect these insights? And this is probably one of the most important one. The connection, again, emphasizing the connection between the insights and the learning design. If I have data that has been processed through some complex procedure and is used to gain insight about, let's say, student engagement, how is this student engagement then connected to the elements of my learning design? Now, a quick refresher, remember the three streams. By now you should be all familiar with it. In the highly technical stream, we're going to be concerned about automating the set of scripts and interfacing with this entity we'll call the statistical package. In the data science stream, of course, we're going to be designing scripts to produce the models we just described. And remember that these models are about prediction, so they are supposed to be predicting. And the education design stream will be about connecting again or identifying the models that are more relevant to help us gaining that insight. And we need to start exploring things like classification or linear regression or any other models and see how can we fit them in the overall design. Now, for each one of the streams, these are three questions or topics for you to consider. In the first one, the highly technical, remember that we are all about automating the process to accumulate data and to load in this statistical package. So the tasks for this week will be about interfacing between the log processing last week and the statistical package. The other question we want you to start thinking about is how is the best way to prepare this data for this stage. So in a sense, what we would like you to envision is a handshake or a handover of data between your scripts that process the logs and whatever is needed for this statistical analysis. And then typically what happens in these statistical packages, the events need to be pre-processed. And this pre-process is also something that will probably fall on your plate, and you need to create specific scripts. And sometimes these scripts cannot be written anymore in a specific programming language, but they have to be specifically addressing the statistical package. In the data scientist stream, three topics for you to consider. First is this notion of preparing for model creation. There is quite a lot of tasks and quite a lot of steps that need to take place in there. You can think in terms of data cleaning or normalizing data distributions, things of that sort that you need to start thinking about. Then we want you to delve directly on the creation of these models, the predictive models. And here probably the most challenging part is identify the variables that are relevant and then identify the adequate algorithms to produce this model. And then finally, we want you to start thinking or start producing some measures about the quality of this model. Is the prediction a good prediction? Is this model good for prediction? And this is something that it needs to be assessed in order for us to know if it makes sense to be used. And finally, in the Ed Designers stream, we want you to start going deeper in these connections and start exploring which models that would be coming from the data analysis stage would be the most useful ones to provide insight during the deployment of the learning design. And this is something very important. This is something we would like you to consider in real time. So what kind of information would be useful for me to extract from the predictive model so that I can act on my design while it's running? A second angle is to think about how these models can be used to improve the learning design. But as you can imagine, this is a completely different context. This is basically offline. This is after the learning design has been enacted. I can go back and use the models to start gaining insight and making predictions and perhaps making adjustments. The predictions are probably a little bit more suitable for the real-time scenario, but there are an equally important number of measures you can derive in the context of offline improvements. And basically, the third thing we want you to start thinking about is these conventional predictive models. How do you connect them with the design? In other words, start drawing specific parts of your design, let's say, for example, assessment or engagement or perhaps projects or any element you can think of, and see if there is any predictive model that would relate to any of these elements. Again, like in the previous week, we encourage you to post any questions you might have in the discussion forums, and the instructors are eagerly waiting for you to answer your questions there.